Empathy in medical practice. We're so excited and happy to be together. And definitely, dear distinguished guests, students, residents, faculty, UT alumni, it's our pleasure to be here with you and to have a nice conversation this evening about empathy in medical practice. And I think you'll see that our guests that are on this panel will provide and enrich your experience tremendously. Real quickly, just want to mention a few things as we get started here. My name is Mohammed Musa, and I'm a proud double alum graduate of the University of Toledo and the University of Toledo College of Medicine and Life Sciences. At the time, it was called the Medical College of Ohio in 2001 and 2004. And I'm an emergency medicine physician by trade, and I'm currently serving as the University of Toledo College of Medicine and Life Sciences Alumni Affiliate Board President. And this webinar is being hosted by the alumni affiliates. So as a reminder, as we go through this webinar, we want to make it as productive as possible. Attendees will be muted, and it's being recorded, just to let you know. And if you'd like to ask questions, just go ahead and drop them in the chat box and we'll incorporate them through the webinar as we move forward. I'm privileged to share this panel today with our special guests, our distinguished guests, and to me, I call them my friends. First, I'd like to mention and introduce Dr. Coral Mattis. She's an associate professor in family medicine and also an associate dean for foundational sciences. She is involved in so many aspects of the College of Medicine, including mentoring of the students, and she's mentored me. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Richard Paat. He's a clinical professor of medicine, and he's a faculty advisor for Community Care Clinic and the Students for Medical Missions, a big part of our College of Medicine. And myself, I've traveled with him to Honduras on a medical mission trip, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about empathy in these trips later on this hour. And finally, and last but not least, is Dr. Mary Smith, an associate professor of medicine and pathology and hematology, and a whole bunch of other things. And her educational responsibilities include clinical undergraduate medical education, graduate medical education, and just suffice it to say that there's not a piece of the College of Medicine that she's not been a part of or led. So I just wanted to introduce, first of all, our panel together. And the purpose of our gathering tonight is to focus on empathy. And by now you must be thinking, what the heck is an ER doc like myself doing talking about empathy? Well, it's because my specialty needs it the most. I love my life-saving, high-stakes, high-acuity field, but burnout is very high in my profession. And I wanted to do something about it. I mean, often forgotten in the practice of medicine today, its implementation, the implementation of empathy is crucial to save our profession. You know, medical schools, curriculums, and residency program curriculums are jam-packed with medical knowledge and clinical skills, and rightly so. But the humanistic side of patient care, I think is being pushed back into the back seat. So we want to have an emphasis today more. Today there's an emphasis more on like the disposition of a patient rather than on compassion. And if you gain nothing else from this hour, I just want you to pause and self-reflect on the need to incorporate empathy into our patient care. I mean, you might think that this is something that goes without saying, but modern medicine has changed so much that we've kind of left empathy behind. So as my term comes to an end as the president of this affiliate, I wanted to use its weight and of this position and of the Alumni Association to bring awareness to employ and use empathy. And last thing I'll do, and I know you want to hear from our speakers today in our panel, I just want to give you a couple definitions that I felt were important and they affected me and I kind of live by it. So empathy is the competence of a physician to understand a patient's situation, their perspective, and their feelings, and to communicate that understanding and check its accuracy, and to act on that understanding in a helpful therapeutic way. So that was kind of like the doctor side of empathy. A second definition is that amazing ability to notice what is going on in another person and focus your wonderful training and competence on that other person and do whatever you can to help that person. So if you remember only one number from this entire webinar today, it's 30 seconds. 30 seconds of empathy can make a difference for you and your patients. So as we begin this program, there's a chat box off to the side, and I just want you to type in, what does empathy mean to you? What comes to mind when you hear the word empathy? So I'm going to go ahead and turn to the panel, and the first item that the first aspect of empathy that I wanted to bring up is why is there now a lack of empathy in medicine, and why is it important to bring it back? And I'd like to open it up. I'll start off with Dr. Smith.
You know, it's interesting. I've been thinking about this as we've talked about this discussion, and it's correct. It seems, and I emphasize seems, like there's less empathy today, but I will tell you, personal experience has shown me recently that it still exists. My husband has multiple serious medical problems, and we have incredible physicians at UT. And I will tell you that uniformly they show empathy. But I also could see where it can get lost. I've been a physician now for more than 50 years, and that's a long time. And medicine has changed a lot. Medicine moves much more quickly than it used to. There's so much more to do. We don't have as much time with patients, and we have the option to do so much more to and for patients that I think it's easy to lose the impact of just with that 30 seconds of, what can I do to help you? Or I understand how difficult this is. That's really all it takes. It's a few moments of looking straight into the eyes of the patient or a family member and letting them see that you care about them. And you have a sense, you can't be in their shoes, but you have a sense of what's going on. And I think as young physicians, people need to think about, it's more than the science. What medicine has done is incredible. It's the science plus the giving of yourself to that patient, the feeling that you care about that patient over and above everything you can do scientifically for them. And I think it's harder now. It's much harder than when I first started. There were 6 drugs for chemotherapy. There were 2 anticoagulants. There wasn't a whole lot I could do as a hematologist. Today, there's a whole spectrum of things to do. There's new diagnoses. There's new science. But underneath, buttressing it all, is that personal care for the physician. And if we could just remember to do that, I think we'll make a better connection to the patient, and they'll make a better connection to us, and they'll do better, and we'll do better.
Dr. Mattis, what could you add to that in terms of employing empathy, like in your practice and what you've seen happening?
Yeah, Dr. Smith, very well said. I think, it's interesting. You've been in medicine 50 years. I've been in medicine 25 years. And I think, we talked about this at our earlier kind of practice session, the different generational changes that we've seen through the years. And I think, a couple of the things that you said just about focusing so much sometimes on what we're supposed to be doing the right thing medically, knowing the science, we can get very caught up in that. And rightly so. There's so much that we can offer patients, and we can get very excited about that. But I think, Dr. Musa, one of the things that you mentioned in your definition, it's not only hearing and caring about the patient, but making them feel like you hear, listen, and that you care for them. And I think that's the piece that sometimes we disconnect just a little bit. I can walk out of a room and say, well, I really did hear them and I cared about them, but if they didn't feel it, it didn't happen. And I think that's different across generations. What an 80-year-old needs to hear, to feel that they or heard, and what a 50-year-old and what an 18-year-old needs can be very different sometimes. And even, just in our very digital society, where many of our connections now are via social media, we're not used to looking each other in the eyes so often and connecting that way. But it's still in my opinion, such an important piece of human contact. And even, the COVID has been difficult for me. I'm definitely a, touch your hand, give a hug, type person. And even those little things that I think have been lost, we have to work even harder to show and demonstrate and show our patients that we heard them and that we care about them.
I completely agree. And, one of the things that comes to mind that comes up in these discussions is the depersonalization of medicine. We refer to patients as room 17 or the patient with that CT scan or that finding. Dr. Paat, what are some of the things that you do to make sure you have and employ empathy in your practice to make the patient feel connected?
Well, pre-COVID, as soon as I walked in, I would typically apologize for being 30 minutes late, but also making sure you sit down in front of them, shake their hand. And, I'm an internist. I've been taking care of a lot of them for more than 30 years. And so I know their personal stories and break the ice that way. Now with COVID, now it's an elbow tap, but they still enjoy that. They get a little laugh out of that. But really sitting down and making sure that you do have good eye contact and that you're not glued to this computer, 19 clicks to send a prescription out. I've heard a lot of stories where patients have said that, I went in to see that physician. They never looked me in the eye, just looked at the computer the entire time and clicked. And yeah, we have a lot of things to do in our 15-minute visit to take care of 10 major problems and make sure we dot our I's and cross our T's for the insurance companies and for the entities that we work with. But yeah, at the end, it's all about that personal experience. I mean, with COVID, it's been difficult, but I had a patient the other day that, she had just had some bad news, a prior history of cancer. It looks like she had a recurrence and she just wanted a hug. And she asked me, could we hug? And yeah, let's give it a big hug. Right.
And one thing that I've noticed is that when you do employ the empathy, it helps you yourself as the physician. Is that your experience?
Well, definitely, yeah. I'm not beyond crying with my patients.
So the other thing I wanted to mention is that I've noticed in the ER it's very, very fast paced, and everything there is about dispositions and moving things forward. And I just forced myself to find those seconds or that minute to connect with the patient and show them that I understand what they're going through. I personally believe that you can find time, if you can find time in the ER to be empathetic, you could find it anywhere. What's your experience been in the clinic, Dr. Mattis?
Yeah, I agree. And I think, obviously there are some days when you have a little more than 30 seconds and some days when 30 seconds is about it. But I've said that to my nurse before, there are days that if a patient, I find that especially with patients I have long-term relationships with, there are going to be days that my patient needs that 10 minutes to really, I just need to sit and listen. And that pays such dividends forward that next time that they come into the office, they believe that I truly heard them last time, and it's equity in the bank for me in terms of them feeling like we have a good doctor-patient relationship. Hopefully builds trust that I have their best interest going forward. But I think doing it early in the visit is really helpful. I always try to start off with, if there's something, and I make little notes in my chart about patients, the name of their cat or what type of dog they have.
Yeah.
If I can mention something like that, or even just, what's going on in your world? How are things at home? Just something that shows that I really care can go a long way. And we even say that to the medical students. One of the things that we encourage them early on when they're learning to interact with patients, get a history, we tell them to use an empathy statement. And it might seem a little artificial to put that on a checklist, like use an empathy statement. But I think, it really can, I feel like it can be one of those fake it till you make it things, if you start using that language and you learn how to use it, it can really become part of your rhetoric and your language. And so just little things like, oh, I'm sorry, that must be hard for you, or, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. You know, if a patient, if a good friend of mine calls and says, hey, you know, I mean, I've been having a bad headache for a couple days. I don't say, and when did it start? And how would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? I say, oh man, I'm sorry to hear that. What's been going on, right? So just making that connection early in the encounter can be really important.
And just to build on that, one of the things that I've enjoyed doing is, I mean, this might sound a little silly, but I use the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. Like a lot of patients come in wearing sports gear, and I'll like in a calm, fuzzy way give them a hard time about it, you know, like about the game or what Ohio State, Michigan, this or that, and then they know right away that you're not just in there to get some info and leave. They know that you're really paying attention, that you care. And it doesn't always have to be like kisses and hugs and touch.
Yeah.
It can be just relating to something that they care about. If they have an Ohio State on it, so those Buckeyes, they're fantastic, aren't they? I don't know, Dr. Smith, can you kind of expand on that or build on that? Have you ever done anything like that?
Oh, sure. When I first came here, of course, from Montreal, I had no idea who the Buckeyes were and all this crazy rivalry. I mean, football in Canada, Canadian college football is like our high school football here. So I would talk to the patients, say, explain this to me. And then my really wonderful experiences were, I did a clinic in Wauseon for over 18 years. And when I first started going out there, I can remember hearing, gosh, the pea crop is going to be great this year. Or the bean crop is going to be great. And I thought, what on earth are they growing all these green beans for? I can't imagine we're eating that many of them. And finally, this delightful old gentleman said to me, he said, you know, Doc, we're talking about soybeans. Don't you get it? And he and I had this ongoing relationship for a long, long, long time. He taught me all about farming and how to predict what the weather was going to be. And it didn't take a lot of time with each visit. And I'm going to make a confession to you now. I'm, as you know, I'm not in clinical practice now because, by the way, Dr. Matus, I will be 80 next month. So we have to be cautious about the 80-year-old analogies and stuff, you know. But what I found was that sometimes a patient needed a little more time, and I never could fit into that little rigid box. You've got 15 minutes for every patient. Now, this patient really only needed 5 because the dosing on the Coumadin just needed to be adjusted, and that was quick. But the next patient might need 20 minutes. If you get behind, as you do, Richard, I always made a point of having somebody apologize to the next patient. Just let them know I'm here, I'm busy, but I will be with them. I think we have to be flexible enough to say, you know, it's my decision as the physician how much my patient needs of my time today. I really don't want an insurance company or some rigid algorithm telling me what to do. And so I'm making another confession. I was willfully late at times for appointments, and I really don't like the electronic medical record. I really dislike it when you sit in the room with a doctor and you really get to know their left ear. That drives me nuts. That eye contact, for whatever brief period it is critical. And I think we have to find a way to do that. And I've watched physicians recently, and I notice most of them are adapting. They turn to the computer, but then they come back to you. So you know that you're getting their full attention for periods of time. Patients need to know you care, just like people need to know you care.
One thing I've done in the ER in that regard is I will adjust the patient's gown. Sometimes the gown is kind of like falling, and I'll just grab it and pull it up above their shoulder, and then they'll feel. I think they feel that, you know, we care, like you're saying.
Yeah, personally.
So, Dr. Paat, I want to make sure I include you in this conversation as well. Are there other things that we've talked about eye contact, we've talked about sitting down, any other things that we can tell our attendees to do when they get into the clinic or when they into the hospital?
Yeah, I mean, I always usually start off with a little friendly joke if I know them really well, enough to the point that, you know, it's hey, you smell a little bit today, or I know they just came in from outside, or you know, if it's work related, you know, if I know that they're construction, I'll tell them I'm trying to redo my kitchen and I've been using a lot of duct tape, you know, something that's almost demeaning to me, but so something that praises their work, their work ethic and their work level, and something that we can come to at a common cross grounds. So, I mean, that's what I try to do with all my patients, actually.
Exactly, exactly. Can you tell us a little bit now? I wanted to about the medical missions and empathy. I remember when I went with you in 2004 to Honduras. I still remember we were there for 5 days, and we were in La Esperanza area, and we saw 1,111 patients, because it was 1,111. And I remember seeing you take care of the patients, and I looked up to you from that time, and I still do. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about like empathy and the medical mission trips and those sorts of things.
Sure. One case that comes to mind, his name is James Lee Sine, and he's a 7-year-old boy that was in Haiti, and he was born with bilateral club feet. And so he's in the school that our volleyball team helps us support. I don't know if you can actually see this picture here, but he was born with club feet, and in Haiti, that's an early death sentence, and he was quite poor. So there was a team of doctors that came in from Rome, and they said, "Hey, we can come and bring you back to Rome and get you fixed." And they probably forgot about him while we heard about that. And it took about 8 months to get him a passport, to try to figure out how to get a pediatric orthopedic surgeon up here at Toledo Hospital to do the case, get ProMedica to do the case for free, find a place for him to stay. And we brought down our team, and we were supposed to bring him back with us after our mission to Haiti. And U.S. Embassy didn't give him a visa yet. So his appointment was on Monday. We left on Sunday. And so we weren't able to bring him back, but we found somebody else to bring him back. And, that was an 8-month struggle to get him up to Toledo, and then another 8 months in the surgery aspect. We accompanied him on every visit to the orthopedic surgeons, and, made sure he had ice cream afterwards. And the orthopedic surgeon, his name is Dr. Chip Monk. So he was wonderful. And eventually, he liked the United States, but we told him, our goal was to make sure that your feet are fixed so that you can have a life in Haiti and send you back to your family. And so there's James Lee after his feet are fixed, which is wonderful. And then we brought him back to see his father and his family. So we brought him back there, and we maintained our communication with James Lee. Every mission we drop by his school, do physical exams on the kids, make sure that they're okay. He still leads a very, very difficult life because of the conditions he's in. Last time we actually heard that his father potentially might be abusing him. And so we had to go back and make a special trip just to visit him and make sure his feet were okay, but also talk to his father one-on-one and make sure that James Lee was going to do well. So in James's case, it started as just a visit to the school, and that became a couple of years of helping James Lee get better and better, and still maintaining that how he's going to do. One of the things that I'm sad, it was, once we fixed his feet, we found out that he now has this hip dysplasia, walking gait issue that we never realized when he had the club feet. And I asked Dr. Monk, well, are we going to have to fix the hips too? And he said, well, he probably won't have any problems until he's about 50 years old. And sadly, I had to tell him, that the average age for a male in Haiti is about 50 years old. So why put him through a surgery like that right now? Maybe we can think about that in the future. So that's my story about James Lee and our missions and how we impacted the health of somebody. And, what a little Haitian Creole I knew, he taught me, and I taught him English. And when he was here, he went to a bilingual school, so he learned some Spanish. And I think he had a little girlfriend at 7 years old, and we joke a lot about that. So fond memories about James Lee.
Is it hard to be a doc sometimes when you have to really get that close to patients, or do you have to build or create a barrier to do your job as a physician? Because that comes up a lot in this discussion with empathy and sympathy.
Sure, sure. There's always that medicine side, and there's always that patient side. And I guess it was a lot easier because this is a 7-year-old boy, so it's also, you know, a father-son type situation. But explaining to James Lee, you know, what was going to happen to him, you know, when he first came out with these big feet, and his feet were all cast after the surgery, he was crying. He said that the doctor made the wrong surgery. I can't walk with these big feet. And so, you know, explaining to James Lee what it was all about and how he was going to get better. But yeah, you have to walk that balance.
Exactly. Have you had difficulty with that, Dr. Smith or Dr. Mattis, on like being able to separate out your humanistic side and being too sympathetic and maintaining your job as a physician to take care of patients?
It's a challenge, you know. You can get quite close to some patients, and you have to be very sensitive to that, because if you can feel that starting to happen, you need to kind of pull back a little bit, not to the point that the patient feels abandoned ever, but because if you lose your ability to keep the space, you'll lose your ability to make the tough clinical decisions. And I had a funny experience just today. A former patient of mine called me. She's fine. It's her son who is now sick, and he has the same congenital hematologic disorder she does. And her complaint was, nobody's talking to me about what's going on with him. And he's a 20-year-old. And I said, well, make sure that he's given permission for them to talk to you, first of all. And secondly, be very direct with them. Be with him, your son, at the bedside when the doctors are there, so you can get your questions answered. And I can remember her. I took care of her when she was 17. And so the image of her son now struggling with something similar to what she had, but I understood what she was saying. But I saw in that situation the same thing we talk about. There was so much going on with him and so many people taking care of him that she couldn't figure out who was in charge. And once we talked it through, I think she felt a little bit better. But I thought, how very odd, you know, here we are. She's now 40 plus, and we've still got that link. And, you know, I don't hear from her very often, but once in a while. So sometimes you will be able to make a transition in your relationship with a patient, but not while they are actively your patient. You have to somehow keep space.
Yeah. Dr. Mattis, can you add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree. I think there is a fine line, but I also think that, you know, definitely crowding that line toward making the patient feel like you truly care about them is better. And I'm going to, actually, I was kind of just looking through the chat box as well, and I'm going to piggyback this on something Susan Miranda asked about, you know, I've seen some healthcare professionals take a tough love approach. I think you have to earn that right to do that. And I think sometimes the way you earn the right to take a tough love approach is to really make the patient feel like you truly care about them, you know, inside and out, and truly understand them. I think it's hard to take a tough love approach early in a relationship, because they're going to say, well, you don't understand where I'm coming from. And I had this happen recently, a patient that I've seen for 7 or 8 years, and she's kind of, you know, gone through this cycle up and down. She'll have good times and she kind of forgets about, you know, following some of the instructions we talk about. And then she comes in at rock bottom and needs help. And so this, a couple of weeks ago, came in and was kind of rock bottom. And we've gone through this cycle 3 or 4 times. And I felt like it was the right time to back off on my empathy a little bit and have some tough love, because I've done it 3 or 4 times before. And, you know, for me to say, you know, I've seen you through this cycle and I care about you too much to see you do it one more time. So how can we not do this again? So, but I think the tough love has to come after the patient truly believes that you have their back, that you not only care about them, but truly understand the shoes they're walking in. Until that time, tough love probably isn't as effective.
I completely agree. And just to kind of switch gears a little bit, in the ER, you know, we have a lot of patients that come in cardiac arrest, and we resuscitate them, but we know that their survival and mortality is really low. And one of the things that I've learned to do in the emergency department is when they're getting ready to go up to the the intensive care unit, I always try to make it a point to like rush over as they're being wheeled up and leaving the ICU, and to wish the family, thoughts and prayers with you. We wish you the best. Just because that's probably going to be the last thing they remember of the ER, I would imagine. All the other things, but the last image might be me saying to them, the best for you. We wish you the best, thoughts and prayers, and just connecting with them. Now, I do want to, that is important too because of litigation. Physicians who are compassionate and empathetic, there's countless studies on this, are less likely to get sued big time. I wanted to mention that. So if anybody wanted to talk about that, that would be great.
And I think very good points. And, not only that, but there's also good evidence that shows that physicians who show empathy, are empathetic, are more likely to get the important pieces of history out of patients. It's certainly decreasing risk of litigation, but quite frankly, it is the right thing to do. And you're more likely, it's very easy sometimes when you're in a rush, or again, I tend to run half an hour behind on good days. When you're in a rush, it's easy to kind of just run in, run out and get what you need. But how do you know you got what you needed, in order to do the right thing for the patient? And there's good studies that show that if the patient thinks you really care, they're more likely to share the really important pieces. If they think you're just there for the quick, in and out, they think you either don't care about those other pieces, or maybe they think they're not relevant. But you make better diagnoses, more accurate and successful treatment plans when you do display appropriate empathy, and that's important.
Dr. Smith, I've noticed sometimes if I display empathy up front right away, there's this moment where the patient's face just transitions from this anxiety to like deep breath. Okay, they're going to listen. They're going to pay attention. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, what I notice is when you get that connection with the patient, you can see that change in their expression, and it's as if, okay, we're together in this. And I think saying that, you're not alone. I'm here with you, and let's do this together. It's either the patient and you as the physician, or the patient, a family member. If you can get that sense of a group activity, patients feel terribly alone, and especially in the emergency room. First of all, it's cold. They're in a foreign environment. It's often busy and noisy, and they can hear bits of conversations. It's a very scary environment. And if you can come in there and connect to them and be sort of a part of their team so that they know you're with them, you'll see a relaxation come. And then they start to hear you. When they're frightened, they don't hear much of anything, or they may hear bits of it and get it wrong.
Yeah. Thank you. I agree. Dr. Paat, Jessica Allman in the chat says, as a current med student and hopefully eventual resident, I know Jessica, she wants to do emergency medicine. How can I best teach the importance of empathy to medical students on my future service? So how can she teach it to others?
And great. So we try to teach empathy at our free clinics, whether it's on the street, whether it's at the community care free clinic, whether it's the migrant centers, and first of all, by example, obviously, and making sure that that you know how to listen. And it's not just me that teaches empathy. It's actually the third and fourth year medical students that have some experience, and they teach the first and second year students how to empathize. And you can see that learning curve. You see it in the missions also. The first year medical student that is trying to figure out what the language barrier is and how to do some things. And then finally, by that fourth or fifth day, sitting down and listening to the patient, their family, and really understanding what's going on. So in our situations, it's a little bit more difficult because we're in their turf. We're sitting in a parking lot. We're sitting in a field trying to understand what they've been going through. At our free clinic last Thursday, we had a 17-year-old girl that came in, and Her story was she had just immigrated up from Honduras. She was from La Ceiba, not too far from where we were, Mohammed, in La Esperanza. And, you know, just trying to listen to her story. She came over without a parent. She was pregnant at the time. She delivered her child in Mexico while she had to wait to get her interview and cross over. She crossed over illegally, was intercepted by ICE and then put into a holding cell, and then finally was released to family members up in Toledo. And so, you know, for her, I told her, you know, I can speak a little Spanish. Obviously, Dr. Mattis can speak Spanish also, and that was a breaker. And then to find out that our teams have been to Honduras, you know, for the last 20 years, 21 years, close to where she's from, and we understand a little bit about what she's going through. Obviously, we didn't get through the entire harrowing experience of 1 month of walking up through Honduras and into Mexico and all the other sadness that probably happened to her along the way. But she knew that we could understand. And, you know, we broke the ice at that point. We said, you know, come on back next week. You can go to the women's clinic, probably see Dr. Matus there. And she said, can I bring my baby as well? Yeah, bring your baby as well. And, you know, we'll have a family physician come in and examine that patient. So difficult life situations and the patients that we see in missions and migrant workers and internationally. But the more you experience that, the more empathetic you can be. And you're right, even just a simple word in their home language is enough to say, hey, they're trying. They can understand what I've been going through a little bit.
Exactly. I do want to say, I hope no one gets offended with me saying this, but I think growing up here in the U.S., I grew up here, you know, we're pretty sheltered. And, you know, if you don't, I think maybe participate in some kind of service, that's something you're doing out of the goodness of your heart for free, without expecting a paycheck, you might not become an empathetic person. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, I think when you provide the service to others, it feels good, and you know you're doing something of benefit to others. I think that can help build empathy in the future as you become a medical student and a future physician. So,
There was a time way, way, way back when if you chose to, you didn't have to bill a patient. You could just say, I'll write off these costs. And I remember when I went to medical school north of the border in that big ice box up north, you know, we were taught you didn't bill any medical professional, and you didn't bill members of the church, the clergy. And so I came here with that in my mind, and I started doing that. And suddenly I got myself into real hot water for that. And I thought, how sad. And so, you know, I think sometimes we get ourselves into a regulatory box that is really unfortunate, because I think by our nature, physicians, for the most part, and people who are in the health professions generally, seem to have a sort of an empathy gene. They really want to take care of people. You know, and I look at Dr. Matus and Dr. Paat. Oh my God, I mean, they're giants in that industry. They go off to places that are a little bit scary, actually, and don't speak the language very well. And I think it's unfortunate that we've been regulated out of some of our ability to be as empathetic as we want. And that's sad. And, you know, maybe physicians need to someday stand up and say, enough, you know, stop, no more regulations.
I think that's what we're all hoping for. And, you know, the transformation of patient care and medicine becoming, you know, the commoditization of medicine, it's so painful to watch. And I think if we can have venues like this, and if medical schools and residency programs can incorporate just a touch of these sorts of activities, and Dr. Mattis mentioned earlier that they teach empathy in the first few questions when they go see a patient. I mean, I know at UT it's very important. At College of Medicine, it's very important to teach this, and we definitely wanted to build on this. Don Batsky says in the chat, Thank you for hosting this. Proud MCO alum, 1987, faculty member at Emory, and memorable experiences as a student. And I always state that empathy and compassion are the virtues that guide me with patients, with students, and in other parts of life. Does this school of medicine have a gold humanism society? Yes, it does. I think empathy goes outside of being a doctor. It's everything else that you do. So does anybody want to respond to that?
Brodsky as a student, he was a wonderful young man. I think that's true. I think if you're empathetic as a person, you're empathetic as a physician. I don't think you can separate those things.
Yeah.
And I do worry about if I see a physician who isn't. They may be sad in life because they're missing connections to fellow human beings.
So 3 of my children, I have 4 kids, 3 of my children when they were born had to go to the NICU.
Ugh.
And yes, that's, you know, even as a physician, it was terrifying, it was scary. And 3 of them had to have surgery not long after they were born. And the point that I'm trying to make is when I was on the patient side, the parent side, and I saw how the neonatal ICU, and it was here in Toledo, at the Toledo Hospital. I'll never forget them. They were so wonderful. The nurses and the physicians, they displayed the best empathy, and they said everything was going to be all right. I mean, my whole doctor side was out the window. When it's your own child, it was out the window. I mean, I was helpless, and they really supported me. And I think that's when I woke up and started employing empathy in my practice. Like, I want to do that for my patients. So I'm not sure if anybody has any stories similar to that they'd like to share. Or,
I was going to piggyback on a couple things in the chat, if you don't mind.
yeah.
One of the students said, as a patient, the times I feel the greatest empathy from my providers when they remove their ego and are genuinely making it about me, not them. I think that's a great way to express it. I mean, if you can make it not about, this isn't my agenda, it's the patient's agenda first.
Yeah.
Of course, there's going to be things like, no, I need to address this potassium that's 6.5. But beyond that, we can talk about what you need. And so I think that, and putting that into practice in daily life, I think goes a long way in terms of doing that for your patient. Another real quick thing, one of the students asked, if you see a patient that doesn't exactly have a great attitude, do you find it hard to be empathetic toward them? Honestly, I don't like to not be liked. I like people to like me. And so I find it a challenge, quite frankly. You know, I will try, you know, I'll try my cute face, I'll try my sad face, I'll try my, and if I have to, I'll try the, you know what, I'm here to help you. Please let me help you. So I think I find it a challenge. I mean, eventually it can beat you down on a bad day, but I think I find that I want them to feel empathy. Darn it.
I understand what you're talking about, Dr. Mattis. I always used to say to Dr. Skeel, who was my mentor, he was my boss when I first came here and saved me from making a lot of bad mistakes. But he one day said to me, he said, you know, Mary, you're sort of the end of the line when it comes to hematology. When nobody else can deal with them, you're going to end up with them. And there was this one particular patient. Oh, he was just, difficult, challenging. And there were a lot of things about him that were challenging. He had a terrible illness, and I kept reminding myself of that. But when, you know, he kept calling me honey and cutie and sweetie. And so one day I sat down with him and I said, listen, there's nobody else in this city I can refer you to because you've been through all the other hematologists. You and I need to work this out. Now, I don't call you dude. Don't call me honey, and don't call me sweetie. I will take care of you till the end of your days. But we're going to have to do this on a professional relationship. And he sort of looked at me. It was like, oh, okay. From there on, we had the best relationship. And I think there are times when, as physicians, we need to let our patients know when they may be crossing a border. And yes, there are difficult patients. There are days when I'm difficult. But I think if we're honest with our patients and constantly reassure them, we'll take care of you, irrespective of anything else. I don't have to like you. I don't have to go home with you. And you're sure not going home with me. But I will take care of you.
Excellent. So just to give everyone a notice, we've got about 15 minutes left, which is great. So we'll continue with the questions. Harsh indicates that he or she, I'm sorry, forgive me, indicates that on a bad day, how do you stay empathetic on a bad day? And I think you were just touching on that, Dr. Smith. Let's say you're having a bad day. We all have bad days.
Oh, and sometimes you just have to kind of take a deep breath and say, boy, I sure don't want to be doing this today, but this is my job.
Yeah. Dr. Paat? Oh, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I think remembering why you're doing it, even on a bad day, remembering why, which is at the heart of it, which is connecting with the patient and figuring out what they need, can actually be helpful. You know, there's a lot written about, I mean, we've talked about burnout for so long, but I think more and more we're talking about that kind of moral injury, right? It's the knowing what your patient needs, but not being able to get it to them. And these really kind of what underlies a lot of the, you know, what we call burnout. It's not the, I mean, it is the long hours and the paperwork. I mean, that certainly is draining too, but it's really that, you know, not being able to get your patient what they need, and empathy can actually help with that moral burnout quite a bit and decrease burnout.
I had
Yeah. For me, bad days are whenever I have to fight with insurance companies to try to get something approved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, if I'm in my office, you know, it's the patients will be out, the walls are thin, and they'll hear me yelling and ranting and raving why that patient had to be admitted, and you know, 92-year-old with a neck fracture, where else are we going to send them? And but then when I come back into the room, you know, I'll apologize, and they'll say, having a bad day, and I say, no, not really. I'm just fighting for a patient. And once they realize that we're on the same side, that we're working to help them out, then, you know, that's how I get through my bad days, that we're all in the same team together. And at the end of the day, we're trying to help them out.
Exactly. I think the equivalent for me in that in the ER is when I give my patients extra gauze or extra Curlex or extra antibiotic ointment, and I'm like making sure no one's looking. But the point is, it's the best feeling when you're connected to your patients and you're doing everything you can to help them feel better. And I think that's all they're asking for. Is empathy contagious? Is empathy contagious?
Yeah, I think it is.
I think it is.
Sure.
Sometimes you have to almost give permission to people to be empathetic. I think especially young novice learners are a little cautious about, should I be showing this feeling to a patient?
Right. There's a study that I was reading not long ago. It gave an example of like when a medical student becomes a resident in one of the technical fields like surgery or orthopedics. They used to be warm, fuzzy, cozy, and then they join these fields that are a little tougher, and they convert. They lose the empathy and they get rid of it because they think that's what's expected. And my response to that is, don't let that happen to you, students. Maintain your empathy and your compassion. It's the right thing to do, and don't be ashamed of it. This is how I think physicians can push back against the commoditization of the practice of medicine. Let's see any other questions here that are coming through. Is there a difference in how you are empathetic towards patients and then their families? Anybody want to take that? I think of the world of pediatrics.
Well, the relationship with the patient is always first and foremost, up until the point where the patient can't speak for themselves. I think it's certainly helpful to have a supportive family and to have them on the same page, but when they're not, then I think we need to take the side of the patient and ensure that they get what they need, even if it means, you know, burning bridges with families. And I can think of a couple situations where, you know, I've actually been the bad guy to the family for the good of the patient, and that's still the right thing to do.
Excellent.
Yeah, we always try to get on the same side. You know, I think about all my COVID patients and having to go in the ICU and FaceTime the daughter that lives in Connecticut and on a daily basis, and you know, making sure that opening up the patient's eyes so that they can look at them, and you know, that whether even if it's a, 10-minute FaceTime call or 20 or 30 minutes, that the family's waiting for you at that point. And tough decisions, especially if they're going to get intubated, and that that you are their connection with a family member. They can't be in the hospital at that point. Making phone calls in the middle of the night, it's tough both ways for physicians, for nursing staff, for family members. But you realize that you have to be that bridge for them.
Absolutely. So a lot of questions that are coming in right now in the chat are asking about like solutions and how to build on empathy and improve it. And since all of us here are educators and we work with the College of Medicine, and what can medical schools and residency programs do? I mean, should we make it a mandatory class or lecture, or what do we think?
It struck me earlier when you said, we teach empathy in the first 2 years, which you're right, we do try to do that. But I think some people probably were sitting at home going, how do you teach empathy? Sure, you teach it. I think some of the things that have been said already, there's no substitute for demonstrating how to do it in different ways, allowing students to observe you, showing empathy and having empathetic relationships. On the flip side of that, I think it only takes a couple of unempathetic interactions or viewing those to get a sour taste in your mouth pretty quickly. And again, we all have so much to do. The needs of our patients can seem endless at times, but I think it's our job as educators to always demonstrate it, to always model it, and never let students see us missing an opportunity to be empathetic to students.
I think we need to be empathetic in all of our interactions, not just with our patients, but with the people we work with. If some lab tech comes up and says, my grandmother is sick, they just said she's got COVID, that's a moment. And people see us in every environment we're in. So I think empathy just has to be a part of who you are. It's not something you switch on when you're with patients and then you switch off afterwards. And I think you'll find that with people who are empathetic, they do it by nature.
Yeah, the example I give is when I'm working and housekeeping comes through to empty the trash cans. And one time I was like, why don't I reach under my desk and pull it out and give it to them instead of me getting out of it? So it's just a realization. I agree. It has to span across everything. The onus is on us, doctors, physicians, healthcare providers, to teach our students. I agree. I personally don't believe there's a class that can teach you it. Maybe it'll remind you. Something maybe like this webinar will remind you, keep it at the forefront. But it's something that we as educators, I think, have to demonstrate, like Dr. Matus was saying. One final thing is that empathy can help patients in terms of decreasing their pain, their stress, and their anxiety. Can we touch on that real quickly before we move on? In terms of empathy decreasing a patient's pain, we often think morphine and narcotics are the solution, but sometimes a little empathy up front can help.
It makes me think about, patients, and you deal with this, Dr. Musa, more than I do, but certainly in the outpatient setting too, patients that come in with, pain, anxiety, depression. And I think so often patients are afraid to open up. They aren't sure if it's safe to open up. Maybe they've been told before or labeled they're a pain seeker. They just want drugs, whatever, fill in the blank. But I find that so often, even if that is their end goal, if I take a few minutes and show empathy and try to, truly understand where they're coming from, maybe we can come to a mutually beneficial decision at the end of the day. And even if they don't, even if they come in expecting one thing, maybe they get something better, which is, somebody that cares about them and really listens to them. And so I don't know if that completely answered your question.
Yes, yes. And now we have about 5 minutes left. If it's okay with our panel, I'd like to ask each of you to develop or give a closing statement. for our attendees. It looks like we have a lot of students. So, Dr. Mattis?
Yes, Your Honor, my closing statement is, I think, everything that's been discussed here tonight is so important. I think as you mature as a human being and as a physician, you find more and more the importance of giving others the benefit of the doubt and trying to look at things from their perspective. And this will serve you well, not just with patients, but like you said, with colleagues and in life in general. The less judgmental I am entering a relationship, the better that relationship is going to go, and certainly no place more so than with patients. And so I would always rather leave the encounter feeling that, the patient feels heard and got what they needed than feeling that I got what I needed. And so always aiming for that at the end of the day, I think is so important. One quick thing that I've told students before is, educate yourself superficially about lots of things. And I always use the example, like, I know nothing about cars, but I hear my son and my husband say, like, carburetor, transmission. I can throw those words around. So if I have someone who's interested in that, I can throw around a word or two. They feel like I connected. Those are just good. It's good to know a little bit about a lot of things when you're in medicine, because you can connect with people in a more meaningful way. So,
Absolutely. Dr. Smith? I think you're on mute, Dr. Smith.
Our computer again. The gift I was given to be allowed to become a physician is something I remind myself every day, and my dear old mother reminded me of that. And that gift, I think, if we could just realize what our patients give us by trusting us, it's so important. I can't tell you how much I value all the experiences I have had. And for me, empathy is just a sort of a second nature. I'm a very touchy-feely person, and this last year has driven me bats. I have been cuddling my old teddy bear and my husband. They're very similar. But anyway, I think if we can remember as physicians and as people that empathy is the bedrock of every good relationship.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Paat?
Yeah, I agree that, empathy is not something that you're going to learn in a course. It's something that you can experience. For the first, second year medical students, take the opportunity to join us in the field on our COVID clinics or at the Labra site or at the community care clinic, and cross cultures, try to step into the other person's shoes for a little bit. The more that you practice that, the better you'll become a more empathetic as a physician. So take all those opportunities that are out there, grow as a student, and you'll be a better physician because of it.
Wonderful, thank you. And I guess my closing statement or my last few words is a number, 30 seconds. I can't say it as well as the panelists have said it, but 30 seconds of your time, sometimes with a patient encounter, can make all the difference. So in closing, I can't believe how fast this hour went by. What do you guys think? Can we turn this into a series and do this again in the future? Blow up the chat box, as they say on YouTube or whatever. Let me know if we should do this again. We can build on it. Oh, look at the chat box just taking off. Excellent. Thank you. So definitely, I want to thank Dr. Mattis, Dr. Paat, Dr. Smith, Kim and Vanessa for helping set this up, and the participants, the attendees. And one little plug for the College of Medicine. Remember, one little plug. If you're not a member, please consider joining and support the Alumni Association. Just type in UT Alumni Association College of Medicine, and you'll see everything on there. So with that, I think we're gonna shut it down and look forward to meeting up again in the future.
Thanks, Mohammed.